Coming up, the Ben Simmons freight train is moving at express speeds back to 100% health, 100% impact, and 100% the player that the Nets need him to be. We break down the latest news, where he is both physically and mentally, and how critical he can be as a pure point guard for the Nets this season.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, sir. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we said it before this offseason, but maybe now more than ever, the news on one Ben Simmons is getting, or should be getting, Brooklyn Nets fans incredibly excited as we break down a lengthy, in-depth article that came out just yesterday on him.
Dude, the Ben Simmons positive hype train pulled Adam out of a day off into the podcast. Adam was not supposed to be here for the podcast today and said, "Did you read this Ben Simmons thing? I'm jumping on." That's how excited you can get from reading the article and the interview that was put out regarding Ben Simmons, which we're going to go through we could have done multiple episodes on this article, mostly because it's so lengthy. Frankly, really in this media age, you do not see players really ever speak at this long of a length with really anybody. A lot of different reasons, right? There's podcasts, they have their own stuff, like they just don't want to. It can go wrong, long form interviews, right? Because you can just end up saying something bad. But Marc Spears, who's been sort of at the forefront of giving Ben Simmons information over the course of this summer, did this for Anscape, which I believe is an ESPN property. And I would encourage you to go and read the article the interview. It's very, very long. We'll break it down into different parts here today and try to extract sort of the most meaningful pieces of what we think the Ben Simmons quotes and just perspective are. But I just wanted to start off by saying, one, you walk away from this interview feeling really, really positive about where Simmons is sort of like physically and mentally, and also just giving it up to him to say that, like, look, guys just don't usually do this, right? Like, this is not a normal thing in the media landscape to give this long of an interview with someone. And I think even on its surface, that means a lot, but we'll get into what some of the stuff that happened.
And we're going to dive into the physical side of it first and foremost, because that's what matters when it comes to Ben Simmons. But just that last little note you had there, listen, when you're reading the Ben Simmons tea leaves, you're looking for any tea leaf, right? Anything that could be a positive sign. And this does feel like a lengthy, in-depth interview, conversation about every aspect of what's gone on, going all the way back to his time in Philadelphia and the start of the injury for him. The fact that he kind of walked through every step of that process and then ultimately ends at a place of saying he feels like he is ready to be coming back and is ready to get back in form. That does have an impact to me because he never has had these discussions. He's never given this type of interview over his time with the Brooklyn Nets or even exiting out of Philadelphia as well. So when we think about him from the physical standpoint, this is where you have to get about as excited as you possibly could be, because the first one for me coming out of it is just that he references every instance of himself physically, going all the way back, coming out of the injury from Philly, as never being anywhere near what the version of himself is, what he can be, and physically where he needs to get to. And we've outlined that injury timeline before. We're coming into it. We know he's progressed now to 2-on-2. It's going to be a steady growth from there. But this conversation to me was largely about him acknowledging every attempt I was having to get back on the court and play was a forced effort, and maybe not necessarily everyone was aware that it was not physically going as well as me being on the court or on the practice court would suggest.
Yeah, look, this from an injury sort of timeline perspective, this is as detailed as you'll ever really get from anybody,
Yeah.
especially retrospectively, because Simmons walks through sometimes to the day where things were going wrong from him physically. He references where, for starters, he goes back and talks about where the back problems he thinks originated from, and he says it was a Milwaukee Bucks game, February 22nd, 2020. That was filled in as like a post note, but he was referencing the exact game. And he talks about that's where he sort of wrenched his back and he felt like there was probably some kind of problem. But then he fast forwards. There's other stuff in here, by the way. We're never going to cover everything he talks about here, but he fast forward to right before his time in Brooklyn, where he says before he got traded that he had an incident, a non-basketball related incident, where he felt something in his back and thought there was going to be like a really, really, problem. And that was right before the trade. And you remember he gets traded and he doesn't play basically the entire season all the way through. And that was like sort of a really, really long timeline. He's very clear that the back was like such an issue, right? You have so many examples of not being able to walk, right? Like having leg pains, not being able to sit, not be able to stand for long times, getting like being just on the floor, like his own physical, like house floor, not being able to just like kind of get up because of the back issue and sort of not wanting to talk about it. So when you hear him detail, again, in great detail around like all the issues that were stemming from these back issues, does it make you feel more sort of positive about the recovery because he's detailing the bad times and talking in clear juxtaposition around how he feels now? Because again, this timeline he gives is like a pretty long and excruciating timeline of back issues, like years and years worth of problems.
Yeah, and it was funny, not funny, but interesting because when he references that 2020 game, then it goes just ahead of the bubble and everything gets shut down. And he notes, maybe I got a little bit lucky because
Yeah.
I was able to rehab and try to maybe get myself back a little bit, but not realizing that that maybe was the start of something far more serious. So you probably, on the one hand, if you're a Philadelphia fan, you say, well, you would have liked him to have become more aware of that a lot sooner and maybe have sorted this out because it ends up leading to a bit of a difficult road for that team. But it also lasts. Now, here we are in 2023, right? Talking about still now coming out of this. And to your point, yes, I think it's positive because there's two questions that were asked here about where do you think your health is at this point and what was the most painful part on the court last season? And just a couple of the snippets here. I don't think Ben Simmons saying people realize how bad it was in terms of physically how I was feeling and what I was able to do on the floor, being able to sit down now and not have to lean or slouch in one way. It's kind of crazy for me, but I now feel like I am at 100% right now. I'm building back to where I'm playing. I haven't played in a while, just taking hits, getting my body used to that. But there's like the reference points of not about standing or running on the court, sitting down, just being able to sit down and not have to contort your body a certain way. And when he referenced the most painful part on the court last year, daily things, waking up, standing up, getting out of bed. It was a struggle because I was in pain usually, sitting down for too long. I would get tightness, not being able to drive to the arena myself, like all of these little things. And I think the best way that I could encapsulate this is frame it back to yourself, right? When you reach too high for the can of soup on the high shelf and you feel like you tweak your back a little bit, like just think about the things that you do, right? You go, oh man, is that going to be a problem for me? You go to sit down, you lean a certain way. At no point in that process are you also saying, maybe what I'll do here is go out and perform the highest level of athletics for 48 minutes over an 82 game season? And it did to me contextualize it in terms of what he was going through and obviously frame the fact that I think you have to believe him when we talk about where he is physically now, because he never acknowledged this stuff to this degree prior. And I don't think he would unless he thought that it was a safe time, right? A safe time to say, I've come out of this. I'm now healthy. We'll continue this discussion on the other side and then also look at what really went in tandem with this, the mental aspect of it. And it's not hard to see the footsteps of how difficult it would be to try to fight through this both internally and with outside perceptions.
All right, before we get into that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. We've been telling you about FanDuel all year about this, but if you haven't heard about it yet, you're going to want to really tune in to what they got going here because NFL season's right around the corner. FanDuel's got incredible offers. It's America's #1 sportsbook right now on FanDuel. New customers, who bet $5 can get $200 back in bonus bets. The bonus bets can be used really for anything they have on the site. Go and look at all the ways they've sliced and diced the NFL. You'll be frankly shocked. That's not all, though. And wait for this one. If you're a new customer, you bet the same $5, you're going to get $100 off the NFL Sunday ticket for YouTube or YouTube TV. So this is having your cake and eating it too. You're getting in there, you're getting the $200 in bonus bets, and you also just know you're going to be able to watch the bonus bets because you're going to have the money off for the NFL Sunday ticket. It literally does not get any better than that. It's the best time to join FanDuel. This app's super easy to use. You can bet on everything from spreads to player props and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Okay, so when we're talking about the Marc Spears interview with Ben Simmons and the overwhelmingly positive takeaways from this discussion, which highlight where he was physically and also mentally, and we're going to get into what it means for him going forward here. We're starting to turn a little bit, I think, into the mental side of it, Doug, but there is this kind of bridges that gap there because there's a part where Marc Spears is asking him about what it was on the court, the issues that he was having, and also whether he thought he should have been discussing these things publicly rather than letting everybody speculate around what was happening. And I did think it was interesting. The easy one here is, which is the obvious. People are always going to speculate and say what they want, which just point stop. It's 100% true. Ben Simmons could have said all of these things at any point along the way or any version of this, and everyone is going to, just like we're doing, right? You're going to take his responses and say, are these face value? How do we apply it to where he is? What can he be going forward? In some ways, when it comes to the mental side of things, I get the idea of just shutting it down and saying, what is the point when you are trying to recover physically to laying out the path that you took to try to come back? Remember, going into the beginning of last season, media day, he said, I'm trying to do the things mentally, working on it every day to keep myself 100%, both physically and mentally. And the follow-ups were, but what do you mean? How are you trying to stay healthy mentally?
Yeah.
And those are hard questions to answer, regardless of who you are and what your circumstances are. So it seems like he's in a better place mentally, but there's a lot of things physically that were draining him in that regard.
Yeah, he talks at length about that aspect of it too, sort of the mental health, trying to figure out where he stood. It's just in terms of his own physical limitations, and obviously he had been jostled around between Philly and the Nets. Now he asked for that, so it's not like that was put under it wasn't like that just happened to him, right? I did think that you do kind of feel for him a little. I'll get into the sort of the flip side of some of this stuff with Simmons because I do want to give sort of the devil's advocate side of some of the things that he said here, and I don't want to just totally ignore that. But when he's talking about the mental, what we would probably perceive to be the sort of the mental side of this, and not talking about what was bothering him or the strain he was under from a pressure standpoint and knowing that his body was not complying. He talks a lot about saying when he looks back at past versions of himself that were on the court during that time, it's he doesn't use the word embarrassing, but you can tell that's probably the word that he's edging around, right? It's that it was a very, he's clear as that was such a lesser version of me. Go ahead.
And just this where he says, I'm not able going into a game, knowing I'm not able, my body's not allowing me to do certain things. It's frustrating. You'll get a simple situations where you're fumbling or you can't hit the rim on a hook shot, whatever it is, just simple things. And that really kind of takes you out of your game in terms of your mental, what you can contribute to the team. But he knows it going into the games, and it's still incredibly frustrating.
Well, and we saw it too, right? It's so obvious. This is the thing we all saw. You all saw with your own eyes last year when he was playing that it was just this shell of himself on the court. You could see it from just the way he was, the non-aggression. You could see it from sort of just the stiff, I would call it the stiffness, no flow at all in the offense for long stretches, most of the season in terms of his shooting, which we'll get to because he does comment about the shooting a little bit. But I think that there was this clear dovetailing component of a physical and mental piece that was just all coming together in like the worst possible way for him, which he talks about, right? It's like it was impossible. He was in an impossible spot. The relationships with some of the guys on the team, not the players, but like even the coaching staff wasn't totally there. Like there was just lots and lots of stuff going on. Again, he's incredibly detailed around this part of it. But if you're worried about like sort of the mental aspects of Simmons' game, which again, we're not putting out there. Like this has been put out there by him. So it's like we're not just like coming up with mental stuff here. And like they've talked about this. Like it was they had an arbitration with the league with the Sixers about this very thing, right? So it's like it's not just something that we're making up just out of nowhere. But I think when you read this, there is definitely an admission here by him, but that stuff really was draining on him in a really pretty bad way. And he didn't want to come out and speak publicly about it, probably because he just didn't feel like it would be met with any open ears. right? And he's probably right. And I'm thinking in some ways he hasn't done himself any favors here in the long term, right? But he's also probably not wrong in thinking that speaking about it at the time wouldn't have gained him anything except for more derision. And he's probably from that standpoint not wrong.
No, and you even because knowing that if he knew that either one, he's going to be on the court and not be able to play at the high level that he wants to, or that he's not going to be able to be on the court, giving an explanation is only going to beget more questions, or is only going to then say, well, you said that it was this, but now over the last 2 weeks, that doesn't seem to be the answer. What's the right answer? What's the next answer? And I'm not even saying that that's, unexpected from media or unexpected from people that are observing from the outside. But as we know, it became almost a non-story last season because we got to a place where it was, well, until he's on the court physically and playing consistently for X number of games in a row, you have to assume that he's not ready, he's not available. So anything beyond that was going to be a little bit tricky. And I'll just add the last note here, which I think was just obviously talking about coming back physically. But he said that he had his brother coming to watch him doing a workout. And his brother said afterwards, and I think about my own brother, who's a few years older than me, where it'd always be like, if you're, whether it's physical, performance, out publicly, a little check-in from a family member said, are you okay? I was looking at him and I was like Ben said, obviously not. This is not how I should be moving. Right. But as he goes on to say, away from that moment, I'm happy in this place now. I'm grateful I didn't do anything to have another surgery, which is also a good takeaway here mentally and physically, because who knows how that could have extrapolated this timeline. To tie a bow on the physical and mental side of it, do you think that we now are, with everything inside of this article, are we now at the point where we're going to be able to, as he says, he's been doing 2-on-2, 3-on-3 will be next and building up. Are we ready finally to close the chapter on the recovery, the physical, the mental, where we will be able to examine Ben Simmons going forward, saying, who are you to this team? And we're going to talk about his role in the closeout segment, but who are you in this team? And what can you be in this role without having any of this other stuff? I'm going to label them, quote, excuses, reasonable ones. But you think we're beyond that now? Because that's the only hedge that I have here as we're still waiting for training camp to come.
I mean, unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever be past it with him, right? I think there's probably at this point too much, and that's not even like anti-Simmons, it's just pro reality, right? There's just there's too much stuff that's happened here with him dating back prior to even before he was injured, before Philly, like problems that people already found in his game that thought that there was, specifically the shooting and stuff like that, like holes in his game that he didn't seem willing or able to address. So I think that just because I'm only bringing that up to say there's been a long timeline here of Ben Simmons related stuff that's happened for going back 3-4 years, 5 years now, that I don't think he'll ever be out of the woods with it. I think
no positive interview can take all of that away.
I think even a positive season wouldn't take it all away. I think, and that's not me being against him. I'm just saying that there's going to be a certain subset of people for sure that will never be able to unsee the stuff that's already happened here. That's not to say he can't reach another level. And again, we'll talk about like the role and impact here in a second. But I just think from that standpoint, unfortunately for him, that is on the ledger here and it's written in pen, and we might get further down from it right? And it might get into the past and fade away a little bit, but I don't think it's ever really going to go away. And I think that's just sort of the nature of what's happened with him over the course of his career.
For all kinds of different reasons, former Brooklyn Net Kyrie Irving, I think, falls into that category as well, right? No level of positive play on the court takes away a level of concern about X, whatever that other thing,
Correct.
non-basketball related. Coming up next, let's talk about his relationship with Jacques Vaughn, Ben Simmons, that is, the role that he expects to and wants to play for the Brooklyn Nets, and what that would mean for others on this roster like Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson. Okay, so one of the other questions that they got to here, which I think is always a fun one. Do you have any sense of what position the Nets will play you next season after playing center? Point guard, point stop from Ben Simmons. That's who I am. As much as people say, fix this, fix that. No, I'm a point guard. When I was playing at that high level, nobody was really saying anything to me. Before we get into the relationship with Jacques Vaughn, do you agree with that? That this should be the path forward if we go back and think about what he was at his peak? We know the facilitation, etc. Is it a good thing that Ben Simmons says, I want to be a pure point guard for the Brooklyn Nets?
Yeah, I mean, only because he probably has to be to really begin even thinking about extracting full value on the contract going forward. Like or just him as a player. Like he needs to be that guy. He can't just be sort of like a roll man, a really expensive roll man wing defender, right? Like he has to be a lot more than that. And really for him, because of the way he plays, specifically the lack of perimeter shooting, like he has to be in that lead ball handler role, at least to start the offense. Or else it's just really not gonna fly. So I'm glad he said it. It maybe causes, I don't know what it does in terms of like how everyone thinks that the hierarchy of offensive stuff is going to break down after this, but like, that might be we might even want to save that for like closer to the season as we get there. But in general, I'm not surprised to have him say this. I actually don't know what the other answer would have been. Right. Like, so I think from this, I'm not sure I can give him huge credit for this answer, but you don't lose any points either. I just don't know what other reasonable answer he could have given here, short of I'll do whatever I can do to win for the team. But that would have been too vanilla also. So I think fine answer. But I'm not sure what the alternative could have been.
And it's interesting too, because in a follow-up about why are you best at the point guard position, I think this would be the first opportunity for, I'll say, a little bit of devil's advocate or just the other side of this coin, because Ben said, because I facilitate the ball well, I make the right decisions most of the time, I'm confident with it, I'm going to make the right decision when I get the ball, make the right passes, able to dictate the game really well. Those things are all true. But then he also says, without needing to jump super high or be super strong, regardless, I'm able to see the game well. Now, I think that there's a both and here. He's just saying that's regardless of me being a big player or a physical player having that strength. And yet, like, a little part of me goes, yes, without needing to be able to jump super high or attack the basket, or, there's some little things in there offensively that you would say, sure, I do love what you are as a facilitator. But even if you want to say you want to be a pure point guard, I still want to hear you saying attacking at the basket when the opportunities are there, right? Being someone who is a 6'10" player that has the physical ability to go dominate smaller matchups at times. So it does seem like he's identifying himself as, I want to be the orchestrator of the offense first, and then other things build out there from that. That can work out, but I just want to make sure that we're still talking about having the balance of using what his full skill set is.
Yeah, and and which is what leads us into like another thing that he said about what he's been working on this summer, which everyone always wants to see, is like, what are you working on this summer? He talked a ton about the just like daily routine he's going to 5-6 hours a day. He actually went into great detail around like sort of like all the different strength and conditioning stuff he did. But obviously
45 of the preparation in every single morning to be able to get out there and start working out. Go ahead.
For sure. So, and Spears, but Spears doesn't let him off the hook here in a lot of ways. I mean, not at all. Like, he asked him point blank about specific things like passing up the dunk to Thibault in the game in 21 or 2021 or 22. Like, that was, the thing that essentially began the exit out of Philly, right? The play that they end up losing the series, and then Doc gives the ill-advised quote about, the future of Ben Simmons, and ultimately he ends up with the Nets. So Spears talks about this. They talk about the training schedule, but he also talks about the shooting, right? It's like the things you've been working on, because Simmons talks like how he wasn't able to get into floaters. He couldn't even make hook shots, and he was embarrassed by the way it looked. He did go through some of the stuff that he's been working from. And they said, what part of your games are you working on? He said, touch shooting, pull-ups, and spot up threes. I don't know for sure if this is the first time that Ben Simmons has ever said, like, specifically he's working on 3-pointers. I don't want to go into the deep internet dive of, of that kind of that kind of look. I would suspect it's one of the first times that he's on record as, like, saying this is something I'm specifically working on. It's buried in the interview. There's a million other things, but for a guy who's always, it seemed, shied away from discussing the flaws in his game, specifically around floor spacing. Even just to have him say that that's something he's working on, I guess it's like me. It's worth something, right? Like, it's worth something because in the past, like if you go back to, he did the Old Man in the Three podcast last year with JJ Redick, and that one was just about how great he was. Like, if you listen back to that podcast, it was all about, like, how awesome he was at passing and how great he was here and how great he was there. That's not a bad thing. Like, you should build yourself up. Everyone should be their own greatest advocate. So it's not, you don't get points against you, but there was a definitive lack of, I thought at the time, discussion around what maybe some of the bad stuff might have been, which would have, just being honest, because it's so front and center with him at times. The fact that he's saying that he's working on aspects like this of his game, I do think it's meaningful. I think it's worth something that he's at least mentioned it as something that needs work, right? And that's a good thing. He didn't have to say it.
Right. Like, you've now acknowledged this is an area that and probably, as we talk a little bit about Jacques Vaughn here in that relationship, it's been communicated to me, right? That in order to be the best version of myself or to be the most successful for this team, etc., get myself back on track, I have to acknowledge that there's areas of the basketball court that I have not, I've acted like they don't exist, right? I don't even know that there is a perimeter shot possible. And we've seen this over the course of the summer, not to, read too deep into things. We've seen, Nicholas Claxton working on his perimeter shot, Day'Ron Sharpe working on his perimeter shot, whatever that translates to when we get to the actual NBA season and these guys' roles, that's TBD. But this offense needs that out of every single player that either one is a quote unquote 5 or big, or a guy that measures like a big and can do some floor spacing, even if he's going to be all in Ben Simmons' case. So I think it's important that he acknowledges it. There's a level of, awareness is the wrong thing, but I just think that there's.
I think that's right. I think there's awareness here. I think there's awareness here in a way that
acceptance that he had issues, right? From a basketball standpoint, that his game had holes, and he needs to acknowledge them if he's going to get back fully.
I think, at least from his perspective, having read about and talked about him for years now, right? And we've basically gotten every quote from him over the last few years. This reads so much different than other things we've heard him talk about in the past. There's just no way around it. Like, it just reads, and that's what happened. By the way, that's what happens when you do long form interviews. Like, a lot of stuff is going to come out when you're willing to be sort of vulnerable here. And I'm sure Spears said, hey, I'm going to ask a lot of stuff that's, good and bad. Like, this going in. This isn't just like, he didn't just like walk up to him on the street, grab him, and just start peppering him with questions for 2 hours, right? Like, this is
a quick hour and a half. I'd like to ask you.
No, these things take time. Like, getting interviews like this takes a significant level of trust from the athlete to the guy. Spears is really, really good at this, right? And so, but knowing that there's going to be, whenever the idea is like, hey, we're going to talk for an hour or whatever, there's vulnerability there. You can't hide for an hour. Like, you're going to eventually have to get into stuff that's maybe possibly uncomfortable. And I think the tone and tenor around what he talked about here is just different than other things we've heard about it. Like, there's no doubt about it. I have one devil's advocate thing of this, but I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, you could not have had this interview with him a year ago, 2 years ago, and there's a lot of reasons for that, where he was physically and getting traded from Philadelphia to Brooklyn, right? What did that look like for him? I want your devil's advocate. I just want to make sure we very briefly note the relationship with Vaughn. He acknowledges, to summarize here, relationship was terrible to start with Vaughn. You had Nash to start. You got Kyrie, Kevin Durant leave. He's injured. There's usually a distance kept between injured players and the coaching staff. So there isn't much of a relationship there. And it led to a little bit of frustration on his part. But he said then, now he looks at it as there's a plan going forward for him. There's a team around him now. Okay, he's dedicated. He wants to work. He wants to win. And he's willing to do what he's needed to be on the court. So now we're in a great place. I speak to him every other day. Vaughn's been down to Miami, where Ben Simmons bought a house. So like, that relationship really matters here, because there is something about when he talks about the things he's working on. I think there's a 1-to-1 coming from Jacques Vaughn saying this has to be a part of what you do for us this season.
Yeah, I thought that was a great call because I had forgotten about that. The part where he talks about just sort of the on a relationship level, admitting that it was bad and it's better. I think that's another one of those ones. You didn't have to say it, right? You didn't have to say that like this was not there at the start. You could have just said it's good now. Like I think that would have been a fine answer. But to go into a layer deeper around it, I do think again it's like sort of fits the overall theme of this thing, which is to say, hey, this is like a deep dive into sort of the last 2 years, right? Yep. Like this is a deep dive into the last 2 years and the future. My one devil's advocate thing before we get out the door, and I hate to end this. I don't think this
I have
is
a
like
positive to close out on, so don't worry.
Okay, yeah, I don't think this is necessarily a sour note, but I think this is we are now. It has always been like this. But now we are definitively in like put up or shut up time with Simmons. Like, and like coming through with this article and this interview and talking about the physicality and I don't even think it would be on him. Like if something went wrong, I'm just saying that like it kind of now after after speaking like this, it has to really, really look good out of the gate, because if it doesn't look good out of the gate physically, if the touch isn't there, look, it's been a long time off basketball, but we could see it right away last year. We knew it right away. We're like, this looks not good, right? This looks weird. It has to at least look more fluid and healthy, because if it doesn't to start, he couldn't have given a more positive update around the health. And so I'd be really concerned. I think we'll know in training camp. Like, I think we'll know in the preseason, like to the sort of like what at least the expectation level should be for him, because this is such a positive outlook for that he's giving himself. Good. I'm really glad about that. But now, like, if it didn't look good out of the gate, I think it'd be, I don't want to say over, but it'd be really, really, really concerning just because of how positive these aspects of it are. So that's my one pump the brakes thing on here is that we still have to see it. And until we see it, you can't put all your chips in on them, I don't think.
Players at the highest level, once you have serious injuries, which is what Ben Simmons has been through, sometimes you get to a place where it is, I'm just never going to be that player again, right? And that's what I think we'll get the sample size on. The little quick positive I'll give here is, and this was when he was asked about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving asked out of Brooklyn, why didn't you ask out? Now, there's a lot of different reasons beyond Ben Simmons' decision-making here, but out of Brooklyn, he said, I love Brooklyn. I don't have an issue with Brooklyn. For me, I want to get healthy. The one thing I could do is get healthy. Couldn't complain about it. I'm in a great city, a great organization, great owners, great coach, great GM. It's all good people around me, and they want to win and do it the right way. I also don't have specific. I also this is a bit of half and half here. I apologize, but I don't want to leave it out. Also, I don't have specific teams I want to go to. This is a job. I'm not going to ask to be put somewhere specific. I just want to play. I just want to be healthy to do this at the end of the day. Now, so overall, I take away that he likes where he is. He enjoys Brooklyn, and he looks at it as this is a job, and where I am is where I need to perform. That last little nugget there did give you a bit of pause, but hey, that's the nature, man. We've been through this with Kevin Durant, with Kyrie Irving. Guys want to win. And as long as Ben Simmons feels like he's physically healthy, mentally healthy, likes the coaches, probably really likes, and as you said, we'll get into this, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, the role, like what can this team look like on the court with a pure point guard, Ben Simmons at the helm? That's another episode for us to discuss, but overwhelmingly positive and TBD.
Yep, I think look overall we're taking almost nothing but positives from this Ben Simmons interview. Really, really good to hear him speak. I think that it gives like that glimmer or bright ray of sunshine, look of hope going into this season. We'll be back again. We'll be talking a little more Cam Johnson later on in the week. We're going to get into some more offseason stuff, some more FIBA stuff going into next week. In the meantime, make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets over on YouTube, where we are now pushing towards 7,000 subscribers. So let's be part of the train that gets that number up there, preferably before the season starts. That would make me feel pretty warm and fuzzy if we got to 7,000. But make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On Nets on YouTube.
Greatness lives on the edge of destruction. Why, that's Big Willie Smith.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets.
Big Willie
threw me off with the Willie part. Okay.
William?
Yeah.
Big William.
All right. One of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.